Welcome to session number 4, Biblical Archaeology. We are going to look at some very exciting finds today during the Kingdom era. Well, just by way of review, the first week, obviously, we talked about, the first session we discussed what biblical archaeology is, the benefits of it, as well as limitations. And then in our second session, we began looking at different eras. The first era, pre-Kingdom era. And so we are following archaeological discoveries in these different eras chronologically. So we're still in the Old Testament, still will be for a couple more weeks, several more weeks. But last week we looked at the pre-Kingdom era, session 2 and session 3. We began the Kingdom era last week with the House of David, Stele. We talked about that. And this week we will continue in the Kingdom era, the period of time of the united monarchy under Saul, David, and Solomon. And then also we'll get into the divided monarchy today as well, discoveries during that time. And then we'll be looking at the exilic period of time, the time of the Assyrians and taking the 10 northern tribes into captivity, as well as the Babylonians taking the 2 southern tribes into captivity. After that, we'll be looking at the New Testament era and archaeology relating to Jesus and his ministry. And then finally, at the end of this course, we'll look at the New Testament era and the apostolic ministry, or the ministry of the apostles. So that's where we're going. Again, pre-Kingdom era, we looked at the Sumerian king list, this incredible list. There are many of them, several of them. This one has a list of 10 kings, you recall. They all had very long lifespans. We don't know if those were actual names of the kings, but there's an amazing correlation between the fact that there were these long lifespans, and then the 10th person survived a flood, and then the lifespans decreased significantly. And so we see a close parallel in some of those details. It seems to be a memory on the part of the Sumerians many years later, at least having this semblance, little bit of truth, although it would have been perverted and changed. But the fact that they recall periods of time, or a memory passed down of lives that were much longer in length, and then a flood, then decreased length of lives, of lifespans. And then we looked at the Silver Scrolls, the earliest recorded writing of the Hebrew Bible. And it matches incredibly close to what the Aaronic priesthood, the Aaronic blessing that was prayed upon the people. And this is, of course, was about the size of a cigarette butt, but would have been worn around their neck, and it would have this statement of blessing. They'd be reminded of this blessing, and as the people of God. Then we looked at the Merneptah Stele, the first statement of Israel being in the land by Pharaoh Merneptah, who created this incredible stele, or monument, to brag about his military accomplishments. But he speaks of Israel in the land, a people group, not yet a kingdom. This is the time of the judges, but it has a symbol at the end of the name of Israel to indicate that they're a people group, but not a kingdom yet, which fits perfectly with what we know about the book of Judges, that repeatedly reminds us there was no king, right, at that time. Then we looked at ancient Jericho last week. Ancient Jericho, the first city that fell, and all the remains there that match incredibly well with the biblical account of the walls falling out and allowing the people to walk into the city, as well as grain that was burned because God told them not to take all the bounty from war, but to burn the city. And it was a time of harvest as well as apparent. All of those details fit nicely with what they found at ancient Jericho. And then we looked at the House of David Stele. Well over 100 years after David lived, but we have the name House of David, or Dynasty of David, which, if there's a dynasty of David or a house of David of kings, and several other kings are mentioned as well, but David mentioning House of David, if there's a genealogy or a dynasty or family of kings from David, then there must have been a David. And so this is an incredible discovery that affirms and silences the critics who said there's no such person as David. He's just a mythical character. And then we also talked about the Kurkh Monolith, which was a city at the time of David. And it was discovered relatively recently. And here we have two gates, which was unheard of at that time. One gate was all that there was typically, but this was found near the Valley of Elah, where David and Goliath met. And this would have been a fortified city during the time of David. And then we looked at our last object, or last sites that we looked at last week was Solomon's fortified cities. 1 Kings 6:1 speaks of Solomon. Remember, David expanded the kingdom significantly through warfare, but Solomon fortified the city, the nation, in 3 key locations. And those key locations are mentioned in 1 Kings 6 as Hatzor, Gezer, and Megiddo. And in Hatzor, Gezer, and Megiddo, they discovered casemate walls, right? These 2 walls, special fortification, and those butted up right next to a gate, a 6-chambered gate. And those chambers would be in places where soldiers could have been, and weapons there as well. And so this is unique architect, unique builder, one architect under the leadership of Solomon. Right? So this is even greater than Kurkh Monolith, which was a 4-chambered gate. Now under Solomon, we have 6-chambered gates in those 3 locations, key locations to protect the nation. Right? So that's where we left off last week. And now we're going to today jump into the Shishak Relief on page 19 in your notes. And if you stumbled across this video on YouTube and you want to register and receive these notes, you can go to the first slide on this presentation and register, and I can send you these class notes as well as the PowerPoints and other materials with this class. So the Shishak Relief. There are several relevant passages of scripture that we're going to read first and then show how these passages are relevant. I will highlight the most significant parts on the screen here, and then we'll talk about it. So 1 Kings 11:26 speaks of Jeroboam. Right? Remember, Solomon dies, and the kingdom is divided into the 10 northern tribes and 2 southern tribes. But this is before Solomon dies. But Jeroboam rebels in 1 Kings 11, verse 26, and then also verse 40 here. Then Jeroboam, right, that's important, Jeroboam rebelled against the king, Solomon that would be. Solomon sought therefore to put Jeroboam to death. But Jeroboam arose and fled to Egypt, to Shishak, king of Egypt. The Shishak Relief is about this Shishak. So he flees to Egypt, to Shishak, king of Egypt, and he was in Egypt until the death of Solomon. Well, why would Shishak harbor Jeroboam? Jeroboam is an enemy of Solomon, and it's in Shishak's best interest that there's some the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? Lack of stability is good if you want to conquer a nation, right? And so that's what's happening here. Shishak, king of Egypt, is harboring Jeroboam, who has rebelled against Solomon. And so shortly thereafter, Solomon's going to die, and Jeroboam's going to become king, and Rehoboam's going to be king of Judah, Jeroboam of Israel. So there's going to be the splintering. So Jeroboam goes back. Now it happened in the 5th year of King Rehoboam that Shishak, the king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem. So Rehoboam's king of Jerusalem. He took away the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house, and he took everything. So again, it was in Shishak's best interest to have some volatility between Solomon and Solomon's enemy, in this case, Jeroboam. And so now that Solomon dies, he takes advantage of this division between the 2 southern tribes of Judah and the 10 northern tribes known collectively as Israel. 2 Chronicles 12:10 as well, 1-10, we read, when the king of Rehoboam, when the king, Rehoboam, was established and strong, he and all Israel with him forsook the law of the Lord. And because they had been unfaithful to the Lord, that Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem. So all of this is significant. Speaking of Shishak, speaking of Jeroboam, speaking of Rehoboam, and this attack of Jerusalem by Shishak, Pharaoh of Egypt. So those are the details that are important as we look at this discovery, this artifact. And I did go down to, as you know, many of you know, I teach in Egypt a good bit. And so I did record this video at the Shishak Relief, and so we'll play it here. Is there any tangible, physical evidence that the Egyptian pharaoh Shishak of the Hebrew Bible ever existed? And if so, is there any evidence of his military conquests that are mentioned in the Bible? Stay tuned to look.
Welcome to Faith Affirming Findings, a podcast dedicated to sharing with you
the incredible discoveries from the field of biblical archaeology.
These findings will strengthen your faith, affirm the historicity of Scripture, and provide you with unique insights into the culture and background of the Bible.
Now, here is your host, Associate Professor of Bible Exposition at Dallas Theological Seminary,
Dr. Paul Weaver.
I am recording today's faith-affirming finding video from Karnak Temple here near modern-day Luxor. An incredible faith-affirming finding was discovered here surrounding Pharaoh Shishak. It is called the Shishak Relief. The Shishak Relief was discovered at the Karnak Temple here. The Karnak Temple is located just north of Thebes, modern-day Luxor, on the east side of the Nile River. The Shishak Relief was discovered on a wall of the entrance to the temple of the Egyptian god Amun. In the 1820s, it was realized that these hieroglyphics were recounting Pharaoh Shishak, or Shishak in the Bible, his military campaign in Canaan. The Karnak Temple of Amun is believed to have been the construction project of multiple successive pharaohs. It is massive in size, and there was nothing comparable to it in the ancient world. The Shishak Relief includes three components. First, a smiting scene by Shishak. Second, a scene with Shishak's god Amun, which includes cartouche rings or name rings of conquered cities. And third, an inscription recording Amun's speech. On the right side of the relief is the smiting scene. This was common for Egyptian triumphal reliefs. Shishak is believed to be raising a weapon in one hand, holding his captives by the hair in the other hand, and is in the process of striking his captives. These captives are Asiatic in appearance, and they are presented with hands raised, begging for mercy from their captor. Portions of this part of the relief have been greatly damaged, and much of it requires your imagination. In the second scene on the left side of the relief is Shishak's god Amun. He is depicted with his famous double-feathered crown. See also the video on the Merneptah Stele, which also depicts Amun-Ra on it, with his famous double-feathered crown. Amun is depicted with ropes in one of his hands. These ropes are attached to prisoners of war who are bound by the rope. The prisoners are also pictured bound to other prisoners with ropes around their necks. The prisoners' torso areas are in the form of cartouches or name rings. A cartouche is an oval with Egyptian hieroglyphics inside. Within each of these cartouches are names of cities, many of which are from Judah and Israel, that Shishak claims to have conquered. Although not all of the name rings have survived antiquity, it is estimated, based on the spacing and number of rows, that there were approximately 187 cartouches. Each of these cartouches would represent a city that was conquered. The third part of the relief is the inscription recording Amun's speech to Shishak. It is located in the upper left-hand side of the relief and flows around the top and to the right of the side of Amun. A portion of the hieroglyphics, when translated, reads, "Welcome in peace, my dear son. You have struck down the flatlands and foreign countries. Your power is victorious over all lands. You have gone forth in victory. You have returned in valor. You have united the flatlands. Served up for you are all the foreign countries ignorant of Egypt, who dared to infringe on your boundaries." I have caused their heads to roll. I imparted victory to your actions, whom I love. For you came forth from me to be my champion. I am your father, the Lord of the gods, Amun-Ra. I will cause your valor to be remembered even hereafter throughout everlasting. This speech, supposedly from the lips of Ammon, designed to boast of the military exploits of Shishak and to proclaim them to have been enabled by Shishak's god, Ammon, who is proud of his so-called son. In 1925, another very significant discovery was revealed. A team from the University of Chicago discovered a 15-inch fragment of Shishak's victory stele. This inscription was uncovered hundreds of miles away from Karnak Temple in Megiddo, one of Solomon's fortified cities. See also 1 Kings 9:15. This provides further corroboration to the story recorded on this entrance to the Karnak Temple. The fragment of the victory stele is 15 inches and identifies the commissioner of the stele, Pharaoh Shishak himself. His birth name is on the right cartouche. His throne name is on the left one. It is believed that Shishak would have posted this victory stele at Megiddo after he took control of this important city. An Egyptian pharaoh by the name of Shishak is mentioned several times in the book of 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles. He is first mentioned in 1 Kings 11:40. After rebelling against Solomon, Jeroboam fled to Egypt for safety. Shishak provided protection for Jeroboam, who would have been Solomon's enemy at the time, until Solomon's death. Shishak is mentioned in parallel accounts found in 1 Kings 14 and 2 Chronicles 12. 5 years after Solomon's death and the rupture of the United Kingdom into two separate kingdoms, Shishak exploited their weakness and led a military campaign against Judah and King Rehoboam. The chronicler states that Shishak's military victories were because Israel forsook the law of the Lord and they had been unfaithful to the Lord. In Shishak's military campaign, he conquered the fortified cities of Judah, but because they humbled themselves in response to God's declaration of judgment, the city of Jerusalem was spared from destruction. The Shishak Relief and accompanying inscriptions is indeed faith-affirming on many counts. First, the Shishak Relief and Victory Stele affirm that there was indeed a historical pharaoh named Shishak, just as the Bible states. Second, the timeline of Shishak's rule, 945 to 925 BC, as recorded in Egyptian sources, indicates that Shishak was indeed a contemporary of Solomon and continued to rule after Solomon's death and during the divided kingdom, just as the Bible records. Third, the Shishak Relief and inscription, as well as the destroyed remains of Gezer, affirm the historicity of events described in 1 Kings 14 and 2 Chronicles 12. Shishak led a successful military campaign against Judah, just as the Bible indicates. Fourth, many cities identified on the Shishak Relief in the name rings are ancient Israelite cities that have been definitively identified, including but not limited to Gezer, Gaza, Beth-horon, Gibeon, Beth-shean, and Megiddo. Fifth, the city of Jerusalem is not listed as a city conquered by Pharaoh Shishak, which is exactly what the Bible states. Sixth, and finally, the fragment of the victory stele discovered at Megiddo offers additional corroboration of Shishak's military campaign in Canaan in general and Megiddo in particular. The Shishak Relief provides great confidence in the historicity and reliability of Scripture. And that is your faith-affirming finding of the week.
Faith Affirming Findings podcast is a listener-supported podcast devoted to affirming your faith in the reliability of Scripture and illuminating your understanding of Scripture.
If you would like to help sponsor the Faith Affirming Finding podcast,
You can make a tax-deductible donation of any amount, large or small,
at faithaffirmingfindings.com. That's faithaffirmingfindings.com and click on the Give tab.
We hope you'll join us again next week for another exciting Faith Affirming Finding.
All right, let's unpackage that a little bit more. I know that's a lot in just a few minutes. So again, the the Karnak temple is where the Shishak Relief is, and the Karnak temple is down here in Luxor on the east side of the Nile River. So I fly into Cairo and I teach in Alexandria, but I drove down to Cairo and took a one-day flight down to Luxor just to see these items, and back the next day in Cairo. And this is it. It's remarkable, the entrance. This is the entrance to the Karnak temple. Nothing like it. And at that time, a huge temple to Amun-Ra, the god of the sun. And here next is a model of that temple. And the portal, or the entrance that we're going to talk about, the Bubastite entrance, is here on the right side, and where this relief is located. So this is just a model as you enter into the Karnak temple to get an understanding of the lay of the land there. So here is that entrance, not a main entrance, but it is named the Bubastite portal, named after the ancient city of Bubastite. And this is, again, the Karnak temple, ancient Karnak. And this is the relief that's known as the Shishak Relief. And again, there are three components to the relief. One is a smiting scene of the Pharaoh smiting his enemies with a sword. The second are those name rings, also called cartouches, that are being taken into captivity, right? Prisoners of war. And those name rings have the names in hieroglyphics of the cities that were destroyed or that Shishak had victory over, or at least proclaims victory over. And then an inscription of Amun-Ra's speech to Shishak. So supposedly the god commending the Pharaoh Shishak, right? And so again, this just to give you understanding here, it's the right side here. This is the damaged portion, but it's believed that this is Shishak, biblical Shishak, also known as Shishak. And again, it does take some creative imagination because of all the damage here, right? But he appears to be striking these prisoners here of war. And then on the left here is Amun-Ra, the god, and his two feathered hat. Looks like feathers there. This is Amun-Ra. Then here are the cartouches, and here to the left of him, which would be connected by the ropes in his hands, connected around each of their necks, and they are connected to each other by a rope as they're being taken into captivity. And then the name rings are, again, hieroglyphics with their city's name on it. And then up here is the third aspect. All around Amun-Ra is Amun-Ra's speech or declaration to Shishak. So here you saw this is a similar smiting scene, which is why we are able to understand a little bit more, because even though there's much damage to that side over here, this is what scholars think might have looked like, kind of reversed the other direction, but holding the hair of the prisoners of war. And so, again, this is a zoomed in view of this here. Amun-Ra is depicted with his, again, that double feathered crown. And remember, we saw that also on the Merneptah stele. Same god, Amun-Ra, and Merneptah also being a pharaoh. Right? And here's a close-up look at these cartouches, these name rings here, and these cities representing the cities that were taken in captivity. 187 cartouches, it's estimated. So that's a lot of cities that Shishak is claiming to have conquered, and including biblical cities like Gezer, Gibeon, Megiddo, and Gaza. So here's, again, I've explained all of that, but I think this is helpful here with the right next to the relief there with the drawing of what remains of it there on the right. And then this is that inscription that Amun-Ra is honoring Shishak for his military conquests. And that's what this is, right? This is Shishak's way of bragging about his military exploits. And then we also saw the Shishak Stele, or fragment, that was discovered all the way up in Megiddo, one of the cities that is mentioned on the Shishak Relief, and one of those 3 fortified cities that Solomon had built. So this would be after Solomon, right? Solomon dies, divided into the 10 northern tribes, 2 southern tribes, and Megiddo would be now part of the divided kingdom, not the united kingdom under Solomon. This inscription was uncovered hundreds of miles away, right? Megiddo up there in the land of Israel, Luxor, where this was discovered. And we mentioned here, so on the right here, this is guesswork as to what the stele might have looked like. And again, remember, a victory stele is simply a monument, an upright monument that a pharaoh or king would be bragging about their military conquest. And so he built one in Megiddo, where he conquered the city. And so we just have this little bitty fragment, but this would have been, they believe it would have been a part of some sort of victory stele there at Megiddo. And this is the cartouche that has his throne name on the left in this hieroglyphic, and then his birth name in this right hieroglyphic. But this would be just this small little part up here. And of course, in the middle would be Amun-Ra, right? Amun-Ra with those 2 feathers, and possibly Shishak on either side of him, just like the Merneptah stele is similar to that, right? Where there's 2 depictions of Amun-Ra and 2 depictions of Merneptah, Pharaoh Merneptah. So the significance, the Shishak Relief and victory stele at Megiddo affirmed that there was a historical pharaoh of Egypt known as Shishak, just as the Bible states, right? That's a very important figure in the Bible. Not one of our heroes, but it does affirm the historicity of Scripture, because they had been unfaithful to the Lord that Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem. The timeline of Shishak's rule, around 945 to 925 BC, indicates that Shishak was a contemporary of Solomon and Rehoboam, just as the Bible records, right? That Shishak Relief and what the Bible records fits nicely. The Shishak Relief, as well as the destroyed remains of Gezer, affirm the historicity of Shishak's attack of Judah. And here's 2 archaeologists, 2 Christian conservative archaeologists say it this way: Gezer's gate complex, casemate wall, and administrative building were all violently destroyed in the mid to late 10th century. They did excavation there at Gezer. We, along with earlier excavators, attribute this destruction to the Egyptian pharaoh Shawshank I, or biblical Shishak, who campaigned through much of Israel and Judah. So they're saying we've seen a destruction layer in Gezer, and it fits the right time of the biblical description of Shishak's attacks in Judah and Israel. So this is more discoveries, not just Megiddo, but in Gezer. Many cities identified on the Shishak Relief in the name rings, those cartouches, are ancient Israelite cities that have been definitively identified as well by those same names. The city of Jerusalem is not listed as a city destroyed. Again, you can read 2 Chronicles 12:9. It's plundered but not destroyed, which is what the Bible states as well. Shishak, king of Egypt, took the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's palace. He took everything. He even took the golden shields which Solomon had made. But the city itself is not mentioned on the Shishak Relief as one of those conquered. Then the fragment we've talked about offers additional corroboration of his attack in Megiddo. John Kurkh, another archaeologist, a biblical scholar, specializes in Egyptology, archaeology in Egypt. And he says it this way: one of the strongest connections between the Bible and other ancient Near Eastern evidences is its presentation of the invasion of Judah and Israel by the forces of Pharaoh Shishak of Egypt. The main temple of Amun at Karnak that catalogs town by town Shishak's military incursion. The Karnak relief provides a striking verification of the biblical account that cannot be ignored. So do you want a map of the lay of the land of Israel and Judah? Shishak has given that to us in some ways, right? The places that he attacked during this time. Now, they've not all been identified, right? Because they believe less than 10% of the land has been excavated, right? So there's a lot of tells still to be excavated and identified, but many of them have been already. So that's a Shishak relief. Pretty cool, huh? If you ever make it to Cairo, if you ever go to Egypt, you need to at least take a day or two to go down to Karnak Temple. There is what is Shishak relief, as well as the Valley of the Kings, it's called, where many of the pharaohs were buried, including Ramesses and Merneptah. They've discovered there, the Merneptah Stele that was discovered down there as well. His tomb has been discovered as well. They tried to hide them. The Valley of the Kings was a place they tried to hide the tombs so that pilfers, grave robbers, wouldn't find them and steal. And of course, they did find them all, except for King Tut. That's why he's so famous, right? He died young, but they found basically everything untouched because the grave robbers didn't find his tomb. And that's why he's so famous, even though he's not that significant, because he died so young. Right? I'd rather have had Merneptah's tomb discovered or Shishak's, but we didn't get to choose which ones were pilfered and which ones were not discovered. Well, let's talk about the Moabite Stone. We're down in Egypt, and now we're going to be in Moab. Any famous Moabites in the Bible? Ruth, right? Ruth is the most famous of the Moabites. There's a lot of relevant passages relating to this discovery, the Moabite stone, also called the Mesha stone, because of King Mesha of Moab. So we'll highlight a few of these. And in white, in the text, I will highlight the ones that are important to what I want to reference in this video, in this seminar. Therefore, 1 Kings 16:16, therefore all Israel made Omri, king, the commander of the army, king over Israel, that day in the camp, right? Israel is the 10 northern tribes, remember? Judah is the 2 southern tribes. Omri did evil in the sight of the Lord and acted more wickedly than all who were before him. Remember that, because we're going to look at Ahab, who's going to do even more evil than his father Omri. Numbers 35 verse 1. Now the Lord spoke to Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan opposite Jericho. So again, Moab, location, nation. Ruth chapter 1 verse 1. Now it came about in the days when the judges governed, right? Judges, time of the judges, that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the land of Moab. So again, Moab is a specific location mentioned in the Bible many times. Now Mesha, king of Moab. So here we have the name of the king, who's going to be important because this is called the Mesha stone or Moab stone. Moabite stone, was a sheep breeder and used to pay the king of Israel 100,000 lambs and the wool of 100,000 rams. But when Ahab died, the king of Moab rebelled against the king of Israel. Ahab mentioned here. Isaiah 15, the oracle concerning Moab. Moab wails over Nebo and Medeba. 2 locations mentioned, Nebo and Medeba. 1 Kings 11:7. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, which is the god of Moab. Not a good thing for Solomon to build a high place, a place to worship another god of another people group. The detestable idol of Moab on the mountain, which is east of Jerusalem. So let's talk about the discovery of the Moabite stone or Mesha stone. A Bedouin tribe, which is a nomadic Arab group of people, Bedouins, discovered the Moabite stone in Dibon, Jordan. Here's Dibon in red. And Jordan, of course, is this area is where we call this, the nation of Jordan is on the east side of the river of Jordan, right? So remember the Sea of Galilee's at the top, got the Jordan River that goes all the way down, and the Dead Sea. To the west, most of that to the west is Israel today. Most of that to the right of the river Jordan is the city of Jordan, or the nation of Jordan, rather. And so the Moabite stone was discovered in what's today known as Dibon, Jordan. Dibon is 13 miles east of the Dead Sea and 43 miles south of Amman, Jordan, which is, I've flown into Amman and taught in that area as well. So a Bedouin tribe discovers this. This is a map of Israel and Judah at one point. Of course, the lines change back and forth as nations are fighting with one another. But you can see where Moab is in relationship to the Dead Sea and where Dibon is. And this would be a part of the nation of Moab at one point. Obviously not in the drawing of the lines here, but as nations go back and forth and lines go back and forth, separating nations, this is where it was discovered. Here's the remains of ancient Dibon. And Dibon was the capital of the Moabite kingdom in the 9th century BC. And so here's the Moabite stone. In August of 1868, so it's been discovered for a while now, August 1868, before any of us were born, the Bedouin tribe showed this stone, previously unseen by any Westerner, to F.A. Klein, who was an Anglican missionary in the area. Klein realized what they had shown him was really significant. This is important. He didn't know exactly what it was, but he knew this is an ancient king. This is an important discovery that needs to be interpreted. So he makes it known to the outside world, to the Western world. So a lot of these stories of discoveries and then acquiring them is very interesting, fascinating. And so in my research for my book, I try to go back to the original archaeologists and sometimes, in this case, a missionary who saw it, and in their own words, record what they had to say. So I went back to as many of those early records as possible. Sometimes they're archaeological journal articles. After they've discovered these things, now they write them up and explain them and include the stories of their discoveries. Here's what happened. In October 1869, the German consul was finally able to reach an agreement. So they're trying to negotiate how they can get this Moabite stone out of these Bedouin tribal areas and into Germany, where they want to put it in a museum. So in October 1869, the German consul was finally able to reach an agreement with the Bedouin, this Bedouin tribe, on a purchase price of the Stele, sometimes called Stele, spelled Stella like this, sometimes spelled Stele. The British call it Stele. I like the way they pronounce it. However, another snag appeared. The stone would have to be transported through territory under the control of a different Bedouin tribe. So lots of Bedouin tribes controlled by the Ottomans at this time, who refused permission for the stone's passage through their territory. This is where we get the term tribalism, right? Different Bedouin tribes. When the Ottoman authorities attempted to intervene to allow transportation of the stone, the Bedouin, who hated the Ottomans, destroyed the stone by heating it in a fire and then pouring cold water on it. What happens to that? It breaks, right? As a result, the Stele or Stele shattered into many pieces, which were then taken by a number of Bedouin families and placed in their granaries in the belief that the stone had powers to ensure fertility of their crops. So they were using it as a good luck charm, right? As hoping it would cause them to increase in wealth and produce. So got all these broken pieces and distributed amongst the Bedouins. How are we going to get this back again and construct it? How is it in a museum now? Well, let's talk about that. Well, the artifact itself is 4.1 feet tall. So I'm 6 foot, right? 6'1", so 2 feet shorter than I am. So it's a pretty good size object, not as big as the Merneptah Stele, which is like 9 feet, I think it was. But this artifact is 4 feet tall, 2.26 feet wide, 14.6 inches deep, and it had 34 lines of script on it. And as I mentioned, 57 fragments were reassembled. So they've not been able to reassemble all of them. They've not discovered all of them. There's still some in the ground at different people's homes, probably. But eventually, these 57 fragments were recovered, these portions, and assembled. And some fragments have never been recovered. Approximately 2/3 of the stele has been located. And so here's a reconstruction of that written out, so it's easier to see the portions that have been discovered and the portions that weren't discovered in white, right? The gray parts are the parts that were the portions discovered. So how did they figure out what the writing is on the other part? Did they just reconstruct it? Well, thankfully, a Frenchman made a paper impression of it before it was destroyed and scattered. And so this impression of this inscription was made before it was smashed into pieces, allowing for most of the wording to be recovered, even where some fragments were not. So fascinating story, huh? Well, this is a victory stele again. Pharaohs, kings loved victory steles, right? Because they are trying to make a name for themselves. They're bragging about their military exploits. And along with that comes people and places. And again, we talked about last week, I think, that we don't have a lot about Israel and Judah, right? We don't have, as far as Solomon and David did not build these victory steles. That's, if they were, it would be taking the glory away from God and trying to make their own legend, right? Their own name for themselves. So we can account for why there aren't victory steles in, at least amongst the good kings. But it's dated to the 9th century BC, this Moabite stone. And King Mesha dedicated this victory stele to his god Chemosh, who is honored for providing victory for the Moabites over the nation of Israel. So we see a few names here that we read in the scripture at first. And here's a portion of the inscription. And I'm going to highlight those parts that are significant to the biblical passages we've already read. I am Mesha, son of Chemosh. I should have highlighted Chemosh too, right? The king of Moab. My father was king over Moab for 30 years. Omri was king of Israel, and he oppressed Moab for many days. For Chemosh was angry with his land, and Chemosh said to me, go take Nebo from Israel. I took from there the vessels of Yahweh and hauled them before the face of Chemosh. So many people, places, and events, even the name God, Yahweh, the personal name for God by the Jewish people. Right? So the Mesha stele affirms the biblical record in at least 8 ways. 7 are highlighted in this text alone. 1, the Moabite stone identifies Omri as the king of Israel, just as the Bible states. 1 Kings 16:16. Therefore, all Israel made Omri, the commander of the army, king over Israel that day in the camp. So we have a mention of Omri, king of Israel. 2nd, the Moabite stone identifies Moab as a historical land and the Moabites as real people, a real people group, just as the Bible repeatedly does. And we didn't look at all of the biblical reference, but Moab is clearly an important adversary to Israel and Judah. And it's in Moab. They cross over the Jordan River, isn't it? As they're going to go into Jericho, and that's where they're at when they're take the census and are about to go into the land and take Jericho. The Moabite stone names Mesha as the king of Moab, just as the Bible indicates. Now, Mesha, king of Moab, was a sheep breeder. 4th, the Moabite stone affirms that Omri and his son oppressed the Moabites. Of course, that's his perspective, right? They were oppressed by Omri, which is Mesha's interpretation of being required to pay tribute to Omri and Ahab. And tribute means you're paying off the other king so that they don't conquer you. Right? And we're going to see Jehu does that. And next week, we're going to see that for the king Jehu does that to an Assyrian king. Now, Mesha used to pay the king of Israel 100,000 lambs and the wool of 100,000 rams. There it is. Fifth, the Moabite stone names many other Moabite cities, including Nebo, Medeba, and Ataroth, that are mentioned in the Bible. See, these are specific places. Again, the Bible talks about real people, real places, real events. And here we have archaeological artifacts that affirm the historicity of Scripture. Moab wails over Nebo and Medeba. And so this judgment that takes place, Isaiah mentions this judgment that's going to come upon these cities. The Moabite stone also speaks of the tribe of Gad, which was given the region of Moab as its tribal allotment. This should have been in the conquest, right? They should have taken and controlled this as they're entering in the land. Of course, they did not follow God's directions. And so Moab was part of the tribal allotment to the tribe of Gad. The sons of Gad and the sons of Reuben came and spoke to Moses, so Moses gave to them, to the sons of Gad, this land. Seventh, the inscription uses the same personal name of Israel's God, Yahweh, and it's highlighted there in red. This is the oldest undebated occurrence of the name Yahweh outside of biblical literature. The Moabite stone, eighth, the Moabite stone identifies the Moabite god Chemosh, for whom Solomon built a high place. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable idol of Moab. So 8 specific events, places, and people that are mentioned in the Bible and also affirmed by the Moabite stone. Many scholars also are convinced that on that Moabite stone, the house of David is mentioned, but that's up for debate by others. But I think their arguments are persuasive. I would add that as a 9th, but I only included the 8 that are affirmed by virtually all archaeologists. So you can go to the Louvre today and see this on display. It's the reason we need to go to Paris, honey, right? We've never been to Paris. That's the Moabite stone. Pretty cool, huh? Yeah. So basalt and limestone would be the 2 most common types of stone that these structures would be on. Yeah. Basalt is more of a dark like this, a dark black. All right, let's look at one more discovery this week, the Kurkh Monolith. And monolith is just like another stele or monument as well. It's an upright stone, limestone. And now, again, we're in the time of the divided monarchy, 10 northern tribes known as Israel, 2 southern tribes known as Judah, the more prominent of the 2 southern tribes. And the relevant passages here, 1 Kings 16, 2 Chronicles 18, Jeremiah 29, Micah 6, just to highlight a few. We're not going to look at all of them. And I'll go over these a little bit quicker. So Omri slept with his father, so he died. Omri dies. And Ahab, his son, became king in his place. So now we're talking about the next king, Ahab. Ahab did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who were before him, did more to provoke the Lord God of Israel than all the kings of Israel who were before him. So Omri was evil, Ahab was more evil. Jeremiah prophesies against him. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, concerning Ahab. Micah also prophesies against Ahab. The statues of Omri, right? Idols worshiping, right? And all the works of the house of Ahab are observed. So Micah is preaching against the wickedness of Ahab, continuing the unfortunate legacy of his father. So the discovery, the British government sent John E. Taylor to modern-day Turkey to scout out the land and determine if there's good financial prospects for trade there, commerce. And while he's there, Taylor writes, I did not, nevertheless, this is his own memoirs called Travels in Kurdistan, I did not, nevertheless, neglect to note everything of geographical or historical interest. So he's there for other reasons, business reasons, but he's going to take the opportunity to look into the historical details here, which either the reports of the natives, right, those living there, or ancient authors had brought to my attention, to my notice. So he's going to check out these locations. And so again, he's in modern-day Turkey. There's Turkey in relationship to, well, Turkey's much larger, going all the way west, but this is in relationship to Jerusalem. And this is Tel Kirk. So a tel, again, is a mound of dirt. That's layers of civilizations that's not yet been excavated. And so this needs to be excavated to see more what is under this mound of dirt that over time dirt fills in between the buildings and grass on top of that, vegetation. So here's a description of his discovery. He said, I visited the interesting ruins of Kirk. These ruins consist of a high mound and a cluster of lower heaps on the right bank of the Tigris River. At the northwest corner, near the summit of the mound, I had the good fortune to discover a stone slab bearing the effigy or engraved image of an Assyrian king, Shalmaneser III. He doesn't say that. I'm putting that in there for context. And covered on both sides with long inscriptions in the cuneiform character, a wedged-shaped font, if you will, to within 2.5 feet of its base. So at the bottom there, it's not all the way down. That for about 2.5 feet here, there's no inscription, which had purposely been left bare to admit of its being sunk erect into the ground as a trophy, commemorative of its capture by the king, and at the point probably where his legions effected their forced entry into the city. So just like Megiddo, this is a stele or a monument, a monolith to proclaim victory, and would have been put right there where the victory was done. So again, this is a victory stele or monolith. It's comprised of limestone. It's 7.2 feet high, so a good foot taller than me, 2.9 feet wide, and 9 inches deep. So here's the depth of it, 9 inches. And you can see the inscription goes all the way around it. So let's look at more close up here. This is Shalmaneser III, commissioned. He's the one that commissioned this monolith, named after the place it was discovered, Kurkh Monolith. And his engraved image is there. You can see him there, and the inscription goes over the cross, across him, and all around this monolith. Then if you look up close here, there are 4 different objects that they believe are representations. This one I've seen other places, many other places, but these probably are representing different gods of his, that he's recognizing that the gods were in his favor, right? His gods gave him the victory there at Kirk. Shalmaneser, again, is the one that commissioned it, and it involves this engraved writing, these 4 objects that are believed to be his gods. Again, all the way around it is the inscription. Chronology of his victories. The last conquest inscribed on this is the battle at Karkar, which is against a coalition of 12 kings. One of those kings is Ahab. Ahab, the text on this inscription on the monolith states that he contributed 10,000 soldiers and 2,000 chariots. And if that's the case, he would have contributed more chariots than about half the chariots of all 12 kings combined. So the other 11 kings only contributed about 2,000 chariots as well. So this shows that Ahab is a powerful and wealthy king, which the Bible describes at that time. This is the height of the northern kingdom of Israel, shortly before their fall, right? Being taken into Assyrian captivity, but they are affluent. Now, Shalmaneser says, I spread their corpses everywhere. I made their blood flow. So Shalmaneser is bragging about this supposed victory, although historians believe this is an attempt to revise history because other accounts indicate that he withdrew from the battle, was not victorious. But he will become a threat to Israel. And Jehu, shortly after, 12 years later, Jehu is going to be depicted as paying homage to Shalmaneser III. We'll look at that next week. This is an image of Shalmaneser III. So what do we learn from this monolith? First, the monolith mentions Ahab by name. That's important. Someone that's described so often in the Old Testament and depicted as a wealthy king and powerful king. Here we have Ahab on this inscription on this monolith. The monolith portrays Ahab as a powerful ruler, contributing 10,000 soldiers, 2,000 chariots, just as the Bible depicts. One scholar says it this way: the inscription of the Kurkh Monolith is one of the most widely known Assyrian inscriptions, principally because of its reference to Ahab, king of Israel. It is also the earliest extra-biblical source to testify to the kingdom of Israel at its height. So Assyria is on the rise. Right? They haven't yet taken the 10 northern tribes into captivity, but they're growing in power. But Ahab is powerful, more powerful at this time, and the 12 kings together to fight against him, Mesha. The Zondervan Archaeological Study Bible, which is a wonderful resource if you're interested. It's a little bit pricey, but it's got tons of notes relating to archaeology and background and customs. It says the Assyrian record, as well as artifactual and architectural evidence excavated in Israel, fully substantiates the tone of the biblical record concerning Ahab. He was a powerful and prosperous, albeit idolatrous biblical king. Third, finally, the monolith plays a crucial role in establishing a clear timeline for the Battle of Karkar, this very significant battle. So this provides a biblical narrative, helps establish a fixed chronological timeline for Ahab, for Ahaziah, for Joram, and Jehu, those kings that follow after him. And so the Bible doesn't always give us fixed dates, but the combination of the biblical narrative with this description of the Battle of Karkar helps provide us a good timestamp to work backwards from and work forwards with, right? And again, as I mentioned, 12 years later, we'll look at this next week, the Black Obelisk, which has Jehu up here bowing down before Shalmaneser and offering tribute. And here we have a closer look of that top. Right? This is covered with lots of different pictures of kings. And here's the one, Jehu, of kings being conquered by Shalmaneser. This one has Jehu bowing down, and we'll look at that next week in greater length. Here's Jehu. And so Ahab's at the height of the kingdom, but only 12 years later, Ahab was strong, was able to defeat Mesha, but now, sorry, not Mesha, I'm getting confused. Shalmaneser, excuse me, thank you. Shalmaneser. Mesha was the last one we talked about, but Shalmaneser. But soon, Jehu's going to be king of Israel, but not nearly as powerful, and is going to have to pay tribute to Shalmaneser. The Kurkh Monolith is visible at the British Museum, so mark that down as something you're going to see when you go to London. And here's the British Museum. All right, those are the 3 discoveries we're looking at today. Next week, as I mentioned, we'll start with this Black Obelisk and talk about Jehu, right? And again, if you want to, you can watch these videos. Each of these represent a video on YouTube. So thank you for your careful attention. See you next time.